Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and welcome to another episode dealing with our 1991 VW double cab transporter. This video we're going to talk about the range test that we did, and so we'll talk about things such as the motor temperature, controller temperature, uh, watt hours per mile, amp hours per mile, so forth, and let you know what this conversion that we've been following, what the bottom line is, what can it do now that it's all complete and on the road. What can the owner expect? So join us in the classroom, and we'll discuss all of that. In this episode, we're going to talk about range. We've chronicled the conversion of the 1991 Volkswagen double cab transporter, and we've talked a little bit about what we expected along the way. But today we're going to talk about, actuality, what we've done and converted. What does that equate to in reality? What can we expect to get out of this car in the real world? And so the pack size consists of 38 180 ampere hour lithium iron phosphate cells made by China Aviation Lithium Battery Company. And at 3.3 volts per cell, that gives us a nominal cell voltage of about 125 volts. And of course, using Ohm's law, we know that 125 volts times 180 ampere hours, that's going to give us a capacity of 22,500 watts, or 22.5 kilowatts. That's the capacity of that pack. But we can't use all of it, or we don't want to use all of it. We have 80% of it that's usable. The maximum that we want to discharge those cells is 80%, which leaves us with 18,000 watt hours of capacity, or 18 kilowatt hours. That's what's usable. So that part we can calculate. That's easy to do. That's a known. What we don't know is how far will this vehicle go on 18,000 watt hours. Well, typically we use a little formula to figure that out. And what we do is we take the weight of the vehicle and we divide it by 10. And that will give us our watt hours per mile. My handwriting is terrible, I apologize. So we don't have an exact weight on the vehicle yet. We know what it weighed from the factory, and it was approximately 3,350 pounds. And what we're doing is we're guesstimating the current weight for this. And so we figure by removing the engine and the radiator, the fuel tank, a few of those things, that we lighten the car by about the same amount of which we then re-added weight. The motor, the controller, the battery racks, our heat system, the vacuum brake booster, so forth. So we did add, and we figure what we've added brings us pretty much back to this amount. So what we're short is the weight of the batteries. And these cells weigh, they're 12.5 pounds per cell. And so that gives us a battery pack weight of 475 pounds. So if we add that to our vehicle, that's going to give us a weight of about 3825. And actually, when I did my calculation here, I figured it at 3,300 pounds even. So I'm going to change this, and that'll give us a net weight of 3775. And so if we plug that into our formula, then we take that 3775 and divide that by 10. That means we're going to have 378 watt-hours per mile is what we can expect for consumption. And so if we take this figure and we divide it into this figure, we've got 18,000 watt-hours available, and we use 378 watt-hours per mile. That should give us a range of 48 miles. So this is our estimated, calculated range of 48 miles. So let's talk about what is actually the range of the vehicle based on actual driving and testing. So now let's talk about the test drive. Well, not the test drive, but the mileage test drive. And so when we started off, we figured we don't want to go over 48 miles just because that's what we calculated. Let's not exceed our safe range. So we're going to go a little shorter trip. We're even going to go shorter than that just so we have some margin in case it's, you know, a little off. Maybe the thing weighs more. It has terrible coefficient of drag. The thing actually, for the size and weight of the vehicle, rolls fairly easily. It doesn't have a real great rolling resistance, but it sits up quite a ways. These things sit with the back end a little bit lower than the front end. That's just the way they are from the factory. And they have pretty good ground clearance, a lot of frontage area. They're just not a real aerodynamic vehicle, so their coefficient of drag isn't very good. And so run down the freeway, we could see that figure lower. And so we basically set out to go on about a 35-mile round trip to do this test. So when we left, it was 68 degrees Fahrenheit on our ambient air temperature. And our mileage at the start, of course, is 0. So we took a few other readings. The pack voltage, amp hours used, of course, 0 at the start. We took our motor temperature, our controller temperature, and so what we had at the start, the thing had been charged overnight, and of course it had quit sometime during the night and had sat. Our charger is set up to shut off at 132.5 volts. Actually, the charger shuts off at 133, our JLD 404 is programmed to shut it off at 132.5. If it were to fail, the charger would shut it off half a volt higher than that. Little redundancy there to make sure that we don't overcharge ourselves. And so the 133 volts, where do we get that? That's 3.5 volts per cell. So 3.5 times your 38, that's 133 volts. That's the maximum that we will charge those to. So after the thing had shut off sometime and had sat till we took off this morning, when we left, the voltage of that pack was 129.0 volts. The motor temperature was 20 degrees Celsius, and the controller temperature was 21 degrees. So what we did is I had taken the transporter home last night, so I left my house, drove down to a turnaround near Anderson, which is about 20 miles from here approximately. This is a little before Anderson. It's like the first Anderson exit, so it's a little bit less than the 20 miles. To be exact, I pulled off the freeway at the exit, go over the freeway to a motel, pulled in their parking lot, took my readings, pulled back out of the parking lot and returned to the shop. So in the parking lot there at the turnaround, I had driven exactly 18 miles. And the pack voltage at that point was 124. Yeah, I'm telling you, I don't write too well on a board. 124.5 volts. And we had consumed 41.6 amp hours, according to our JLD 404. The motor temperature was at 57 degrees centigrade. Controller temperature, 29 degrees centigrade. So I think that shows you that the cooling system that we're using on our controller works pretty darn well. We drove 18 miles at an average speed of 63 miles per hour. The speed on Interstate 5 is 65 miles an hour until we get to the south part of Reading, and it jumps up to 70. The owner of this vehicle lives in a rural area, and I believe that most of the speed limits in his area will be a maximum of 55 miles an hour. So I wanted to keep it around 60. But the way traffic was flowing and the truck traffic, it was fairly heavy this morning, so I was running between 60 and 65, pretty much 63 as much as possible. I did hit 71 point passing and trying not to hold people up, I bumped it up to 70. But I averaged 63 miles per hour, and that was an average RPM of 3,360 RPMs. It's a 4-speed in this vehicle. They're geared kind of low. So at 63 miles an hour, you're doing 3,360 RPMs. But pretty impressive there. Kept the controller cool. So, like I said, then we swung back around and head back to the shop. Well, the terrain, if you've seen some of our other videos, is up and down. But overall, my house is about 900 foot elevation, and I think Anderson is about, it's less than 600, I believe. So about a 300 foot elevation climb coming back, The shop here is about 840. So, but it's up and down. Had a little bit of a headwind coming back, but not too bad. It's fairly mild or calm winds today. So anyway, back at the shop, round trip was 35.4 miles. And the pack voltage was 122.7 volts. And I consumed 84.7 amp hours. The motor temperature was at 78 degrees. Controller, 32 degrees. And so what does all this mean? We know these are actual readings. We know what actually took place. But how does that relate to our calculated figure here? Well, what it means is if I take the amp hours that we consumed by the miles here, that tells me that I used 2.4 amp hours per mile. And for lighter vehicles, we usually, just a real rough guesstimate is, the rule of thumb we use is 2 amp hours per mile. And that's for cars under 3,000 pounds. And, you know, and typically they come a fair amount under that. This is a heavier vehicle with poor aerodynamics. They came in at 2.4, which really isn't bad for this vehicle. It's better than anticipated, actually. So what that figures out then is how many amp hours in our pack? Well, we have 180. 80% of that is 144. So we have 144 amp hours that's usable. And you take the usable amp hours divided by the amp hours per mile, that gives us a 60-mile range. A little higher than our calculator. That's an extra 12 miles. And so, not too bad. This is our basic target, usually, our normal pack that we put in the bulk of our conversions, what we call our economy pack, or our commuter pack. That's what we typically are getting, 60-mile range. So this is a little bit larger pack, but it's a little bit larger vehicle, but we still hit the 60 miles, which is nice. And so what we found also was that we're using 300 watt-hours per mile. So now we have a little better understanding of this vehicle and what to expect. You know, there's variables in terrain, temperature, driving style. And so I would guess that, you know, if I was going to give somebody the range on this vehicle, I would say the range is 48 to 60 miles. I don't think you're going to get less than 48 unless you're driving hard. Or have, you know, grades to climb, that kind of thing. But that's what I would call an advertised range on range would be 48 to 60 miles, 50 to 60 miles. So, because you could have driven more conservatively than I did. I accelerated on the freeway pretty good. I had 2 times where I accelerated onto the freeway one other occasion where we accelerated to 50 miles an hour while climbing a little bit of the grade coming off the freeway back to the shop. And so there were times where we're using a fair amount of energy. And so if you lived in a level terrain area and saw speeds no greater than 55 miles an hour, I'd say that this is a conservative figure, that you could expect to get even better than that. So let's go out to the shop or out to the vehicle and do a couple other measurements. What I want to do is, with the meter, we'll take a reading on the pack, see what our voltage is, and then we'll sample a couple of cells. And by doing that, what we're doing is we're making sure that the integrity of the pack. It should be that whatever the pack voltage is, we divide that by our 38 cells. That's what our cells should be, and we'll measure. There's 4 of them that we can reach real easy. Just open the door and take the measurements right there. They all should be the same, and they should all be that calculated figure. So let's go take a look. All right, first we're going to measure our pack voltage. We'll do that in the back here. And instead of using the JLD 404 figure, we're going to use the same figure. We're going to measure the individual cells with. We'll use the same meter. And so let's see what we have here. $125.3. So let's measure some individual cells. Well, we should have a reading of 3.3 volts per cell, being that's what that 125.3 divided by 38 should be. So you can see I can get to these very easily here. Let's see if I can hold the meter up where you can see it. And this is showing 3.31. 3.31. Let's go to the other side and we'll check those two also. .31, 3.31. So what that tells me is that the odds are very great that every one of these cells is exactly that. For it not to be, I'd have to have, if there was one cell that was off from the others, there would have to be something else to average out with that. So if I had a cell that was low, I'd have to have one that was high. And at 3.3 or 3.31, and they're charged to a maximum of 3.5, and of course this is after our little range test and everything, I'd say the odds are that they're all exactly the same. And that's thanks to our bottom balancing. And so we used, what was it, 80 some odd amp hours out of this pack. They're still all dead on. We've put about 200 miles on this car so far, and just everything has just been the way it should be. Well, again, thank you for watching. I hope you found this video educational. That's the purpose of our videos. We originally started the video series in response to email questions. We receive an average of 400 emails a day, and it was just difficult to respond to everybody timely. So we created the video series, the different series, to address questions that people had regarding electric vehicles, conversions specifically. And so hopefully we're achieving that objective. Hopefully you're finding them interesting and informative. But if you do have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. But we ask that you not respond with a comment on the YouTube link, but email us at info@ev4unow.com, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. Also, just a reminder that we do offer, the last 2 years now, we've offered them 4 times a year, our 3-day hands-on conversion workshops. We're working on the layout for next year's, for 2014, in which we're going to do something a little different than we've done the last 2 years. So be watching for that. We'll announce that on our website. But if that's something you're interested in, email us and let us know. Let us know what dates work best for you. That's always the difficult part. We only do it 4 times a year. It's to figure out the month and the dates that work best for the most people. And so if you can help us out there, and if we can help you, that's the way we like to do it. So it's a win-win. And thank you again for watching.